20 Hollywood celebrities broken by a child's death, then and now 26. Some celebrities seem to have everything: fame, money, applause, and lives the world envied. But behind the spotlight, they carried the one loss no parent can ever prepare for: the death of a child. Stay with us and subscribe to Classic Hollywood Legends as we uncover the tragedies that changed them forever. Eric Clapton. In March 1991, Eric Clapton received the phone call that no parent is ever prepared for. His 4-year-old son, Connor, had died after a sudden accident in New York. Within minutes, the world that Clapton knew as a musician, father, and public figure collapsed into silence. For years, Clapton had been seen as one of rock music's greatest guitarists. But grief does not care about fame. The awards, the concerts, and the legendary status meant nothing beside the empty space left by his child. He stepped away from the spotlight, trying to understand how life could continue after such a loss. How does a father turn pain this deep into something the world can hear? That question eventually led to Tears in Heaven. The song was not just another hit from a famous musician. It was Clapton reaching for his son through music, asking questions that had no easy answers. Its quiet sadness connected with millions because it did not exaggerate grief. It simply let the pain speak. Connor's death changed Clapton's life far beyond the song. It pushed him to look differently at family, sobriety, and the fragile nature of everything people take for granted. Even decades later, the loss remains part of his story. Eric Clapton kept playing, but never as the same man. Behind the music is a father still carrying the memory of a little boy who changed his life forever. John Travolta. A family vacation in the Bahamas became the moment John Travolta and Kelly Preston's lives changed forever. In January 2009, their 16-year-old son, Jet Travolta, died after a medical emergency. Until then, the public mostly saw the couple through red carpets, movie premieres, and the image of a warm Hollywood family. Behind that image, Jet had faced serious health challenges. Travolta and Preston protected him fiercely, even when the outside world speculated or judged what it did not fully understand. His death left them facing a kind of grief that fame could not soften, and privacy could not completely shield. How does a family keep standing when the child at the center of their world is suddenly gone? For Travolta, Jet's loss was one of the most painful chapters of his life. Kelly, who had always spoken with deep love for her children, carried that heartbreak beside him. Together, they leaned on Faith, their daughter Ella, and later their youngest son, Benjamin, as reasons to keep moving forward. But tragedy returned in 2020 when Kelly Preston died after a private battle with breast cancer. Travolta was left to grieve not only his son, but also the woman who had shared that loss with him. Through both heartbreaks, John Travolta continued to honor Jet and Kelly with quiet dignity. Their story is not only about loss, it is about a family trying to keep love alive after the worst imaginable goodbye. Sylvester Stallone. In July 2012, Sylvester Stallone faced a loss no role could prepare him for. His eldest son, Sage Stallone, was found dead at only 36 years old, leaving the actor behind Rocky and Rambo suddenly seen not as an action icon, but as a grieving father. Sage was not a stranger to Hollywood. He had acted alongside his father in Rocky V, playing Robert Balboa, and was also building his own path as a filmmaker. His death brought instant headline speculation and painful public attention at the worst possible time for the family. At first, rumors tried to turn the tragedy into something sensational. But later reports said Sage died from a heart condition, not the darker story many had rushed to believe. For Stallone, that did not make the loss easier. It only showed how quickly the public can forget that behind a famous name is a real family in shock. How does a father keep going when the son who shared his screen is suddenly gone? Stallone asked for privacy, saying the pain of losing a child was already unbearable. In the years after Sage's death, he became more protective of his family and more aware of how fragile time can be. Fans may remember him as the fighter who never stays down. But Sage's death revealed a different truth. Even the strongest screen legend can be broken by a child's absence. Keanu Reeves. In 1999, Keanu Reeves was preparing for a life he had never lived before fatherhood. He and actress Jennifer Syme were expecting their first child, a daughter named Ava Archer Syme Reeves. But near the end of the pregnancy, the child was stillborn, turning what should have been joy into a grief neither of them could escape. The loss quietly changed everything. Reeves was already known for his intense screen presence in films like Speed and The Matrix. But away from the cameras, he was carrying a private heartbreak that fans could not see. He rarely spoke about it, and when he did, it was never for attention. His grief stayed mostly silent. How does a man move forward when the future he imagined disappears before it begins? The tragedy also strained his relationship with Jennifer. Less than 2 years later, Reeves faced another devastating blow when Jennifer died in a car accident. In a short span of time, he had lost both the woman he loved and the child they had hoped to raise together. Many people now see Keanu Reeves as unusually kind, humble, and gentle for someone so famous. That reputation did not come from a public image campaign. It came from the way he carried pain without turning cold. Behind the calm smile is a man shaped by loss. Keanu kept working, kept living, and kept treating people with compassion, perhaps because he understood how fragile life really is. Prince and Mate Garcia. In 1996, Prince and Mate Garcia welcomed their son, Amir Nelson. For a brief moment, the famously private musician seemed ready for a new kind of life beyond the stage. The studio and the private musician seemed ready for a new kind of life beyond mystery he built around himself. But that joy was shattered almost immediately. Amir was born with a rare genetic condition called Pfeiffer syndrome. His life lasted only a few days, leaving Prince and Mate with a grief they were barely able to share with the world. Prince had always controlled his public image with almost supernatural precision, but this was a pain no image could manage. What happens when a man known for mystery faces a heartbreak too real to hide? The loss placed enormous strain on their marriage. Mate later wrote openly about that period, describing the hope, shock, and silence that followed. Prince, however, kept much of his sorrow private. He rarely gave the public direct access to that wound, but those close to the story understood how deeply it changed him. Their marriage eventually ended in 2000. Prince never had another child. For fans, he remained the electrifying genius behind the music, the style, and the performances. But behind the purple lights was a father who had held hope for only a short time before losing it. Amir's brief life became one of the quietest tragedies in Prince's story, rarely discussed, but impossible to erase. Mike Tyson. In 2009, Mike Tyson faced a tragedy no boxing ring could prepare him for. His 4-year-old daughter Exodus died after a sudden accident at home, leaving the former heavyweight champion broken in a way no opponent had ever managed. For years, Tyson had been known as the most feared man in boxing. He built his name on power, rage, and intimidation. Crowds watched him destroy opponents in seconds, and the world often treated him like someone almost impossible to hurt. But the loss of his daughter stripped away that image instantly. Behind the fame, money, and violence of his career was a father facing unbearable grief. What happens when the strongest man in the room cannot protect the person he loves most? Tyson rarely speaks about Exodus in detail, and when he does, there is a quietness that feels very different from the fighter fans once knew. Her death forced him to look at life, family, anger, and purpose in a new way. It also softened the public image of a man once defined almost entirely by aggression. In the years that followed, Tyson became more reflective. He spoke more openly about pain, responsibility, and the need to grow beyond the chaos that had followed him for much of his life. Exodus's death remains one of the deepest wounds in Mike Tyson's story. It did not make him weaker. It revealed the human being beneath the legend. Bill Cosby. In January 1997, Bill Cosby received the kind of news that can break any parent. His only son, Ennis Cosby, was killed in Los Angeles during an attempted robbery. He was just 27 years old, a graduate student with a future his family believed was only beginning. For years, Cosby had been one of the most familiar faces on American television. Millions knew him as a father figure on screen, but behind that public image was a real father suddenly facing the loss of his own child. The tragedy landed with a weight no fame, money, or success could soften. How does a parent survive when the child he expected to outlive is suddenly gone? Ennis had worked hard through dyslexia and became deeply interested in helping others with learning differences. After his death, Bill and Camille Cosby helped create a scholarship fund in his memory, turning private grief into support for students who faced similar challenges. The loss left a permanent wound in the Cosby family. Camille spoke openly about the depth of that pain, and Bill carried Ennis's name with visible sorrow in the years that followed. Whatever later controversies changed Cosby's public reputation, the death of his son remains a separate and deeply human tragedy. Marie Osmond. Marie Osmond spent much of her life making audiences smile, first as part of the Osmond family, and later as a singer-actress, television host, and Las Vegas performer. But behind the polished stage image was a mother carrying one of the deepest losses imaginable. In 2010, her 18-year-old son, Michael Blocil, died by suicide after struggling privately with emotional pain. For Marie, the news shattered the world she had built around faith, family, and performance. She had spoken with him shortly before his death, never knowing that conversation would become one of the memories she would carry forever. How does a mother return to the stage when part of her heart never comes back? Marie later spoke about grief with unusual honesty. She did not pretend that losing Michael was something a parent simply gets over. Instead, she described it as a pain parent simply gets over. Instead, she described it as a pain that changes shape but never truly leaves. Her faith, her surviving children, and her work became ways to keep moving without pretending the wound had closed. Rather than hide the tragedy, Marie used her voice to bring more attention to mental health, loneliness, and the quiet suffering many families never see until it is too late. Her openness helped others feel less alone in their own grief. Michael's absence remains part of her life. But through memory, compassion, and purpose, Marie Osmond continues to honor the son she lost far too soon. Paul Newman. Paul Newman did not talk often about the wound that changed his family forever. To the public, he was the blue-eyed star of Cool Hand Luke Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and the Hustler. But away from the screen, he was also a father who lost his son far too soon. In 1978, Scott Newman died at only 28 after an accidental overdose. He had tried to build his own acting career, but living under the shadow of one of Hollywood's most admired men brought pressure few people could understand. Scott struggled privately, and when his life ended, Paul was left with grief, guilt, and questions no award could answer. What does a father do when love was not enough to save his child? Newman could have kept the pain locked away completely. Instead, he chose to turn it into purpose. He founded the Scott Newman Center, an organization focused on educating young people about substance abuse and helping families understand the dangers before tragedy strikes. That work became part of Newman's larger life of philanthropy. Fans remember the movie star, the race car driver, and the man behind Newman's own. But Scott's death also shaped the quieter side of his legacy. Paul Newman never used grief for attention. He carried it privately, then used it to help others. Behind the charm and fame was a father still marked by the son he could not bring back. Dr. Dre. For a producer who built his name on sound, Dr. Dre's deepest grief was marked by silence. In 2008, his 20-year-old son, Andre Young Jr., was found dead after an accidental overdose. The news cut through a life that from the outside looked almost untouchable. Platinum records, legendary artists, business success, and a place among the most powerful figures in hip-hop. Andre's death was not just another tragedy attached to a famous name. He was Dre's son, a young man with his own future, his own identity, and a life that ended before it had fully begun. Dre, known for keeping his private world tightly protected, did not turn that grief into public confession. He stayed quiet, letting the loss remain mostly inside the family. How does a father keep building an empire when one part of his world is gone forever? The tragedy added a private shadow to Dre's later success. He continued shaping music business and culture, but the absence of Andre remained something fame could never repair. No award deal or comeback could undo what happened. For fans, Dr. Dre is the architect of West Coast hip-hop and one of music's greatest producers. But behind the legacy is a father who carried a loss too heavy for public words. Lisa Marie Presley. For Lisa Marie Presley, fame was something she inherited before she was old enough to understand it. As Elvis Presley's only child, she lived her entire life under a name the world never stopped watching. But in 2020, the Presley legacy was hit by a loss far more personal than any headline could capture. Her son Benjamin Keough died at only 27 after years of private struggle. To the public, Benjamin was often noticed because of how much he resembled his famous grandfather. To Lisa Marie, he was simply her child, the person she called her beautiful boy, her heart, and one of the deepest connections in her life. How does a mother carry grief when the whole world already thinks it owns part of her family story? Benjamin's death left Lisa Marie shattered. She later wrote openly about grief, saying the pain did not fade or become easier in the way people often imagine. Instead, she learned to live beside it, largely for the sake of her surviving children. The tragedy also changed how many people saw the Presley family. Behind the music wealth and mythology was a mother dealing with an unbearable absence. Lisa Marie continued to speak of Benjamin with devotion until her own death in 2023. Their story remains one of the saddest chapters in the Presley family history, not because of fame, but because of love interrupted far too soon. Robert Plant. Robert Plant was living the life most rock singers only dream about: stadiums, screaming crowds, and Led Zeppelin at the height of its power. Then, in 1977, while the band was touring in the United States, he received news from home that changed everything. His 5-year-old son, Karak, had died suddenly from an illness. The distance made the shock even crueler. Plant was not at home when it happened. One moment he was the voice of one of the biggest bands in the world. The next, he was a father rushing back to face an empty space no applause could ever fill. What does music mean when the person you want to hold is already gone? For a time, Plant questioned whether he could continue at all. Led Zeppelin had already been surrounded by pressure, chaos, and exhaustion, but Karak's death cut far deeper than anything the band had faced. Fame no longer looked powerful. It looked useless beside the loss of a child. Eventually, Plant returned to music, but the grief stayed with him. The song All My Love became widely understood as a tribute to Karak, carrying a tenderness different from Led Zeppelin's usual thunder. Robert Plant kept singing, but the tragedy changed the man behind the voice. Beneath the legend was a father marked by one heartbreaking goodbye that never truly left him. Lauryn Hill and Rohan Marley. Lauryn Hill and Rohan Marley lived under two giant shadows: her place as one of the most important voices in hip-hop and soul, and his bloodline as the son of reggae legend Bob Marley. Together they had children history music and a relationship the public never fully understood. But behind the fame, their story also carried private pain. The transcript describes a pregnancy loss that remained mostly outside the spotlight, the kind of heartbreak celebrity families often bury because the world is too hungry for details. For Lauren, motherhood was never just a soft image. It shaped her music, her choices, and even her retreat from fame. What happens when the public wants songs but the artist is trying to survive real life? Hill's music had already been filled with love, disappointment, faith, and emotional bruises. After becoming Bruise, a mother, those themes became even heavier. She was not simply the untouchable genius behind the miseducation of Lauryn Hill. She was a woman trying to protect her children, her body, and her spirit, while people kept judging her from the outside. Rohan carried his part of that history too, though much of it stayed private. Their relationship did not end cleanly, and not every wound was explained to fans. That is what makes this story different. It is not built on public confession. It is built on silence, motherhood pressure, and the painful truth that even famous families lose things the world never gets to see. Anna Nicole Smith. Anna Nicole Smith's life was already surrounded by cameras, lawsuits, tabloids, and public judgment. But in September 2006, the chaos around her turned into something far more devastating. Just days after giving birth to her daughter, Danielin, Anna lost her 20-year-old son, Daniel, while he was visiting her in the hospital. The timing made the tragedy almost impossible to comprehend. One child had just entered the world, while the son she had raised through years of fame and instability was suddenly gone. Daniel had been one of the few steady emotional anchors in Anna's life, someone who knew her before the headlines became louder than the person underneath. How does a mother celebrate new life while grieving the child who was already her heart? Reports later said Daniel died from a lethal mix of prescription drugs. For Anna, the explanation did not bring peace. Friends described her as shattered after his death, unable to fully return to herself. The public still watched, judged, and photographed her, but behind the spectacle was a mother who had been broken. Only a few months later, Anna Nicole Smith died as well, leaving Danielin to grow up in the shadow of two losses. Daniel's death remains one of the most painful chapters in Anna's story, the moment when glamour, fame, and controversy gave way to pure heartbreak. Roy Orbison. Roy Orbison's voice always sounded as if it already knew heartbreak. Long before tragedy fully entered his home, he had built a career on songs filled with longing, loneliness, and pain. But in the late 1960s, the sadness in his music became connected to losses no performer should ever have to carry. In 1966, Orbison's wife, Claudette, died in a motorcycle accident. The blow was devastating enough on its own. Then only 2 years later, another tragedy struck while Orbison was away on tour. A fire destroyed his home in Tennessee, and two of his young sons, Roy Jr. and Anthony, died in the blaze. How does a man keep singing when life has taken almost everything behind the voice? The back-to-back losses changed Orbison's world. Fame could not protect his family. Success could not give him back the people he loved. Friends said he withdrew deeply, carrying grief in a quiet, heavy way, while trying to continue a career that had once seemed unstoppable. Eventually, Orbison returned to music, but his songs felt even more haunted than before. Fans had always heard sorrow in his voice. After those tragedies, that sorrow no longer sounded like performance. It sounded lived in. Roy Orbison's story is not only about hits and legend. It is about a father and husband who kept going after grief reshaped every note he sang. Joe Biden. Long before Joe Biden became a national political figure, grief had already become part of his identity. Just weeks after winning his first Senate race in 1972, his wife Nelia and their baby daughter Naomi were killed in a car accident. His two young sons, Beau and Hunter, survived, but the family Biden had imagined was gone in an instant. At that point, Biden nearly walked away from politics altogether. Instead of celebrating a new career, he was sitting beside his sons in the hospital, trying to decide whether public service still mattered when his private world had collapsed. He was sworn into the Senate from his children's bedside, a moment that showed how deeply fatherhood and duty would remain tied together in his life. How does a man keep serving the public when grief keeps returning to his own home? Decades later, Biden faced another devastating loss. Beau Biden, his eldest son, died of brain cancer in 2015 at only 46. Beau had been a soldier Delaware Attorney General, and the child many believed might one day carry the family's political legacy forward. That death changed Biden again. It influenced his decision not to run for president in 2016 and later shaped his work on cancer research. Joe Biden's story is not only about ambition or power. It is about a father who kept moving after losing a daughter, a wife, and then a son. Tammy Trent. Tammy Trent built her music around hope, faith, and the belief that light could survive even the darkest places. But in 2001, those words stopped being lyrics and became something she had to live through. During a vacation in Jamaica, her husband Trent Lenderink died in a sudden diving accident, leaving Tammy widowed without warning. The shock was more than personal heartbreak. Trent had been her partner, best friend, and the person who shared the life behind her Christian music career. One day, they were traveling together. The next, Tammy was facing a future she had never imagined, with the man she loved gone. How do you keep singing about faith when grief has taken away your voice? For a time, she could not return to the stage. The music that once carried joy now felt tied to pain. Audiences knew Tammy as a bright performer, but privately, she was trying to survive the kind of loss that makes ordinary life feel unfamiliar. Slowly, faith became less of a public message and more of a lifeline. Tammy returned to music, but her voice carried a different weight. She also began speaking to others about grief healing and the long road back after sudden loss. Her story is not about pretending pain disappears. It is about learning to stand again when love is taken without warning. Vince Neil. Vince Neil was known for excess noise and the wild image that came with fronting Motley Crue. On stage, he looked like a man built for chaos. But in the mid-1990s, that image meant nothing beside the hospital bed of his young daughter, Skylar. Skylar was diagnosed with Wilms tumor, a rare kidney cancer, when she was only 4 years old. For Neil, life suddenly shifted from concerts and headlines to doctors' treatments and the helplessness of watching a child fight something no parent can control. The man once defined by rock and roll rebellion was reduced to a father hoping for more time. What happens when the party stops and all that remains is fear? Despite treatment, Skylar died in 1995. Her death hit Neil harder than any public scandal or career setback ever could. He later admitted that the grief pulled him into a darker period, including depression and heavy drinking, as he tried to numb a pain that would not leave. But Skylar's memory also pushed him toward purpose. Neil founded the Skylar Neil Memorial Foundation to raise money for children's cancer research and to support families facing similar battles. For fans, Vince Neil may still be the voice of Motley Crue, but behind the rock star image is a father permanently changed by a little girl whose life ended far too soon. Amanda Holden. Amanda Holden walked into the hospital in 2011 expecting reassurance. She was 7 months pregnant, close enough to imagine the baby's arrival, his face, his future, and the life waiting at home. Instead, doctors told her that her son Theo no longer had a heartbeat. For Amanda, the news split her life into before and after. She was already known in Britain as an actress, television personality, and later a judge on Britain's Got Talent. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Fame could not soften the room, change the diagnosis, or give her back the child she had been preparing to meet. How does a mother leave the hospital without the baby she came there to welcome? Amanda later spoke openly about the shock, the silence, and the strange cruelty of having to continue living after such a loss. With support from her husband, Chris Hughes, and the hospital staff, she was given time to say goodbye to Theo, a memory filled with both pain and love. Instead of keeping the tragedy completely private, Amanda used her platform to speak about stillbirth and pregnancy loss. She supported awareness campaigns and helped other parents feel less alone in a grief many people still struggle to discuss. Theo's life was brief, but Amanda made sure his story did not disappear. Her heartbreak became a voice for families carrying the same quiet pain.